All right, Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, man, that's where it all starts. So, just a couple disclaimers when we get ready to read it. You know, the Bible is not a scientific textbook. While we do admit that the Bible is not unscientific or can't be proven wrong scientifically, but it's not to be used as a scientific textbook. And so to look for God in science would be kind of like looking for love with a shovel or something. It's not going to happen. But we do find God in the experience of knowing Him through faith. And that's the way He's designed it. He's not going to change it for you. Just because you come along and say, well, if God would just prove Himself to me, then me and God would be okay. Then I would have to acknowledge He is who He is. And I would say, no, He's not going to do that for you. Hasn't done it for anybody else. His design is through faith. Look at listen to, you're already at Genesis 1, stay there. Hebrews 11:1. Faith shows us the reality of what we hope for. It's the evidence of things we cannot see. I wasn't there at creation. I'm not old enough. Some of you think he's probably old enough to have been there at creation. I'm not. I'm not even old enough to be on the ark. So I'm not even that old. But it's the evidence of things that we cannot see. Faith does that. It says in verse 2, through their faith, the people of days of old earned a good reputation. By faith, we understand that the entire universe was formed at God's command, and that what we now see did not come from anything that can be seen. It was spoken into existence by God. And that's the problem with evolutionary theory, or everything just sort of happened with a big bang. Well, who put the stuff together to make the bang? Where did the stuff come from that banged? Well, God started all of that. So I know where the stuff came from. If you want to believe that, you can't just say it all just happened. There's a point where you have to say somebody did that. And in verse 6, and it's impossible to please God without faith. Anyone who wants to come to Him must believe that God exists and that He rewards those who sincerely seek Him. We cannot come to God except by faith. It is by faith that we please God, and we can't please Him without faith. So there is no scientific route that will take you to God. We do see that the Bible supports and we find a lot of science today that supports what God has said about the creation of everything. Genesis chapter 1 has an element that science can never address, and it's the fact that we are created for a purpose. And down in the longing heart of every man, there is the idea that we are for something bigger than ourselves, that there is something beyond us. What is my purpose for existence? And those questions have haunted man. The thing that haunts man, as Job has said, what goes on after life? Will I exist after life? And those are haunting questions that men have been dealing with, because as we're going to see in just a moment, we're made in the image of God, and those things are placed inside of us. And Genesis 1 gives us an account for that creation, or that non-creation science can't address or even begin to deal with. It's amazing to me. I did a lot of studying this week, and I loved it, man. The guy said we couldn't even see you back there for all those books, but I really had a good time as I'm doing a lot of study, and a lot for next week as well. This week we're going to look at the creation sequence, what God did. Next week we'll take a little time and look at why I believe intelligent design, science that supports the fact that we believe what we believe. We'll look at some of that. And what takes place in the heart of man when we choose not to. But it's incredible to me as I look at this that the scientists who come at this from a non-God perspective. So there are two belief systems. I believe that God is, and He started it all, and then we interpret everything, life and all of science, through that. Or there's the belief that it couldn't have been God, it wasn't God. I don't believe there's a God, and I interpret life and all of science through that. We dealt with all of that last week. And it's amazing to me as I'm doing the study to realize that science will accept, the scientists that start with this no-God approach, this anti-God approach, will accept just about anything except something that supports the fact that God started it all. That won't make it into the journals. That won't make it into the textbooks. There's a bias there too, and it's a belief system. Christians today, I find, want to hold on to the authority of Scripture. We want to say, I believe the Bible is the Word of God, and it's true, and it was true, and it is true, and it is for our lives today. And I believe that's true. And then we get to Genesis 1, and we're like, just not quite sure, because there's some things there that science doesn't seem to support these days. And so we want to hold to the authority of Scripture, but we don't want to be taken as fools either when it comes to the approach of Genesis 1. And I can assure you that we are not looking as fools. We will be perceived as fools. Next week we're going to look at the Corinthian passage that says, man, when we hold to our faith, it will seem as foolishness to the non-believers. And we live in a world, and have always lived in a world, that does that. All right. Hey, let's just get right in here. Let's go. Genesis 1:1. I normally read the entire passage and go back and then make comments. We're going to read the passage as we look at the day of creation that it was done. So we'll read verses 1 through 5. We'll make some comments and we'll go back. So we'll keep going back to the text. So keep it there in front of you. Verse 1 of chapter 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the deep waters. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the water. So God was present, even though that darkness prevailed, because light hadn't been created yet. Then God said, let there be light. And there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and He separated the light from the darkness. And He called the light day, and the darkness night, and evening passed, and morning came, marking the first day. I believe there that God created the sun and the moon and the stars and the universe beyond. I believe that He created all of those bodies. I believe that that nuclear explosion that continues to warm us in summer and is not warming us as much now as we head into fall as it used to, that nuclear thing, that is a continuous explosion that produces radiation that warms us, that produces what's needed for plant life to exist. I believe God made that. He created that on that first day. And He put the stars in the universe, and He created all of those things. Now He does something else with them on day 3, and we're going to look at that. On day 2, beginning in verse 6 through verse 8, then God said, let there be a space between the waters to separate the waters of the heavens from the waters of the earth. So when God made it and the darkness was across the face of the deep, I believe that at the nucleus of our world was solid matter, and then everything else around it was liquid. It was all water. And so now He says, I want there to be a space or a separation between the waters of the earth and the waters of the heavens. So He's not dividing water on the earth. He is creating an atmospheric element. He is creating a gaseous atmosphere. And he is creating the ability for there to be a water canopy of some sort that surrounds the earth. So now there is liquid form on the earth and a vapor canopy, as many have called it, that surrounds the earth. This gaseous atmosphere is now created. So let's read on. Let's go back. And God said, let there be a space between the waters to separate the waters of the heavens from the waters of the earth. And that is what happened. And God made this space to separate the waters of the earth from the waters of the heavens. And God called the space sky. And evening passed and morning came, marking the second day. And we find that in the garden, up until the flood of Genesis, that rain had never come from the sky. That everything was watered by a dew or a mist, by the humidity that was produced by being in this atmospheric condition. I think it also accounts for the reason men lived such long periods of time early on. Adam and Methuselah was the longest living guy in the world, lived over 900 years. I look at that and I think, why would anybody want to live 900 years? But I mean, and they didn't age like they do today. And one of the reasons for that, I believe, is because God had created a water canopy, a vapor canopy around the globe that hindered the radiation from the sun that causes the life expectancy to be shortened. Immediately after the flood, the life expectancy of humans and mankind began reduced down to typically about 100 years. And it's not far from that today. We're right in there where it was. But the 800-year lifespan is not there anymore. And I think that's one of the reasons that it's there. For instance, turn with me, just since we're already here, just turn over a couple of pages to Genesis chapter 6. And that's the story of Noah, begins in verse 9 there. But I want you to look at something very carefully with me. Beginning in verse 11, chapter 7, not chapter 6. Go to chapter 7. Beginning in verse 11. And it says this: when Noah was 600 years old, on the 17th day of the second month, all the underground waters erupted from the earth, and the rain fell in mighty torrents from the sky. The rain continued to fall for 40 days and 40 nights. Turn over to chapter 8 and verse 2. The underground waters stopped flowing, and the torrential rains from the sky were stopped. So when the flood of Noah occurred, it wasn't just rain. There was water from the earth that was being rerouted and totally disrupted. And I believe that came by the devastation that God caused by the catastrophic way that He judged the earth. Whether that was a meteorite shower, I don't know how that happened. But I believe that when God created back in Genesis, where we are, you can turn back there now, but when He put that together, when it was first all circled with water. And we're getting to the point where He separates, and I believe that He had a land mass, and the rest was water, and then it joined together. And I believe that at this is personal now, but I believe that at the flood, when God judged the earth, the continents were broken apart. The earth was under such an incredible upheaval, not evil, but upheaval, that it caused our mountain ranges to form, and it caused our seas to form, and it caused all of those things. And that was the destruction of that water vapor canopy in the first time that it rained. That would account for some incredible floods going on. It would also account for this. It would account for the fact that there was an atmosphere that was very tropical on both ends of the earth, all around the earth. That's why we find tropical plant life fossilized in Siberia and in Antarctica, and we find animals that are frozen in the tundra and in those places. And I think that's evidence that there was once a tropical earth, and then when that took place, I think it also tilted the earth off of its axis, which allowed all of that to take place as well. And it caused for freezing, it caused for an ice age, it caused for an incredible flood. I don't think we can begin to understand what took place when God judged the earth and did some incredibly upheaval things when the earth was judged. Okay? So, He creates this atmosphere, and it's very clear that there is water on the earth and that there is water in the skies, and the distance between them is the sky or the air. And He puts in there the gaseous elements that we need, oxygen being one of those for our atmosphere. Okay, number 3, day 3, land and vegetation. So beginning in verse 9, then God said, let the waters beneath the sky flow together into one place, so dry ground may appear. And this is what happened. So the waters beneath the sky, those that were on the earth being held by the gravitational pull, flow together into one place. And I think they were collected into one great space. So the dry ground may appear, and there was dry ground that appeared, that was beneath it, and then appeared as God brought it to the surface. And this is what happened. And God called the dry ground land, and the waters sea. And God saw that it was good, and then God said, let the land sprout with vegetation of every sort, seed-bearing plant, trees that grow seed-bearing fruit. These seeds will then produce the kinds of plants and trees from which they came. And this is what happened. The land produced vegetation, all sorts of seed-bearing plants and trees with seed-bearing fruit. Their seeds produced plants and trees of the same kind. And God saw that it was good. And evening passed and morning came, making the third day. So He separated the water that was on the earth from the land that was on the earth, and then gave the land life, and gave it plant life, seed-bearing fruits. All the three categories of horticulture today were originated right here, the seed-bearing and the producing. So today is a continuation of seed-bearing fruit that was placed there. And God put everything in place to reproduce. The animals, the plant life, mankind. He put us in place to be able to continue moving forward, continue to reproduce for His glory, and be able to thrive and prosper in the world that He's created for us. He separated the land and the seed, and He raised the land so that there was a land mass, and then created vegetation on it. Psalm 104, 6 through 8 says this: you clothe, it's interesting the wording they use and the way it's referenced. He says this: you clothe the earth with floods of water. And I believe that's the way it was created originally. Water that covered even the mountains. At your command, the water fled, and the sound of your thunder, it hurried away. And mountains rose and valleys sank to the levels that you decreed. It was God who made the terrain of the earth exist as it does today. And God did that in His mighty, powerful ability to create and control. Day 4, verse 14 through 19, He works on our solar system. So we see in day 1 that He created light. And I believe He did. I believe He created that nuclear explosion that's going on that we call our sun. But He does something with it. And look specifically at what He tells us its intention is for, and what He is doing with it now that we still benefit from today. Then God said in verse 14, let lights appear in the sky to separate the day from the night. Let them be signs to mark the seasons and the days and the years. And the luminary calendar is still what we use. And we still gauge our calendars by the movement of the stars. And a day is one revolution of the earth, and a year is one revolution around the sun, and we still use our calendar based on the things that God said. I'm going to set it in motion so that you can do that, and today we continue to do that. Lights appear in the sky to separate the day from the night. Let them be signs and mark the seasons and days and years, and let these lights be in the sky. Let these lights in the sky shine down on the earth. And this is what happened, exactly as God said and wanted it and willed it to be and spoke it to be. God made 2 great lights, the larger one to govern the day, our sun, and the smaller one to govern at night, our moon. And He also made the stars. And God set these lights in the sky to light the earth, to govern the day and night, to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good, and evening passed and morning came, marking the 4th day. I believe that it was the luminaries of heaven. I believe it was our solar system that God set in motion so that the planets would all be where they're supposed to be. He created, very obviously from the text, our sun and our moon. I believe they had been created when He separated light from darkness, and now He puts them in place and designs a solar system that gives us exactly what we need to be able to thrive. The perfect distances and the perfect rotations and the perfect spins. And how do you explain the rotation of the earth? We can define it. We can describe it. We can't explain it. And how are there planets and other solar systems and other areas that spin in an opposite rotation of ours? It is God who designed all of that. Our calendar and our lives are based around the movement and the sequence that God put in motion on day 4. I believe that on this day He didn't create the light, but He made that light day and night by a solar system and a rotation that we still experience today. Day number 5, He created fish and fowl. So look at verse 20. Then God said, let the waters swarm with fish and other life. So not only will there be fish that live in the water, there'll be other life as well. Let the skies be filled with birds of every kind. And so God created great sea creatures. That would be the non-fish parts. And every living thing that scurries and swarms in the water. And every sort of bird, each producing offspring of the same kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and let the fishes fill the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth. And evening passed, and morning came, marking the 5th day. He created fish, He created fowl, He created sea creatures. And if you say to me, I believe in the Loch Ness Monster, I'm not going to try to argue out of it. I mean, wouldn't it be fun if God allowed one of those old, that probably all dissolved and devoured by now. I have no problem believing that there were sea creatures that they've become extinct, that we don't know of today, that we don't understand, that would look pretty freaky to us. And those were all created, and many of them have become extinct. Stuff has gone extinct in our lifetime. So 1,000 years from now, things that we know existed that have gone extinct 1,000 years from now, somebody could be saying, there were some weird things back in the day. And that's the truth today. We find all kinds of fossilized birds and different kind of winged animals that I believe have gone extinct, that God created. And He did that. By the way, He hasn't created salad yet. So lettuce does not exist yet. No, it does, doesn't it? But He created fish for a fish fry. He had that in mind. I think that's going to be at the marriage supper. There'll be a big fish fry because God made fish so that we could catch them and eat them. Praise God. It was a good day when He made fish for us fishermen. Day 6, animals and mankind. Verse 24. Then God said, let the earth produce every sort of animal. And notice the sequence. I mean, He put it together. First there was nothing and it was spoken into existence. It was without form or void. He began to cultivate the kind of atmosphere and the kind of place where life could exist. He put all of the elements in place. All of the elements needed to be able to breathe and the way that the plants can survive on carbon monoxide. And He put all of those things together. They needed moisture and they needed radiation and all of those elements coming together as God produces. And He puts it all in place and then rolls it all out. So He said, let the earth produce every sort of animal, each producing offspring of the same kind. Livestock, small animals that scurry along the ground, wild animals. And this is what happened. God made all sorts of wild animals, livestock and small animals, and each able to produce offspring of the same kind. And God saw that it was good. And then God said, let us make human beings. Let us make man or mankind in our image. Now, nobody's ever said to me, I think you have God's eyes. The cheekbone thing, I think you have that. I think that's from God. No, it's not talking about our physical appearance. He's talking about the way that intrinsically and internally we respond, not only to God, but to His creation. Not only to recognize God in His creation, but to want to respond to something in an act of worship. We are worshipful creatures. We're going to worship something. If it's not God, you're going to create your own God, but you will be worshiping something. You'll worship yourself. You'll worship having more. You'll worship something. Something. We are made to be controlled, and all of us are addicts to something. All of us wrestle with something trying to control us. And God says, I want to be the answer to that thing deep inside of you that desires to worship. And we know that because we have been created in His image. And it is in the image of God that we respond. We talked about that last week. That we respond to Him because of how He's created us in His image, in the image of the Trinity. So he says, let us make human beings, verse 26, in our image, to be like us. They will reign over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky and the livestock and all the animals on the earth and the small animals that scurry along on the ground. So God created human beings in His own image. In the image of God created He them, male and female. We're going to go into detail a little bit later on what He did when He created man and woman. Then God blessed them and He said, I want you to be fruitful and I want you to multiply. Just like everything else, like plant life, I have designed to produce and reproduce after its kind. Animal life, to reproduce after its kind. And I want the same thing for you. I want you to flourish in an environment that I've created so that you can flourish. And put us there. And then He says, I want you to bless them and said, be fruitful and multiply and reproduce. And fill the earth and govern it and reign over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky and the animals that scurry along the ground. Then God said, look, I have given you every seed-bearing plant throughout the earth for food, and all the fruit trees for your food. And I've given every green plant as food for all the wild animals and the birds of the sky and the small animals that scurry on the ground and everything that has life. And that's what happened because God said it would happen. He spoke it into existence, and that's what happened. Then God looked over all that He had made, and He said, this time very good. It's very good. Because we were made. And now it's very good. And evening passed, and morning came, marking the sixth day. I believe in that creation, He created dinosaurs. I believe there are dinosaurs in the Bible. I believe when God was taking Job at the end of the book, and He was taking Job and saying, Job, you got a pride issue going on. Let me ask you, did you make that? No, that wasn't me. Okay, then I'm to be worshipped. Did you make this? And when He's describing these things, He describes Behemoth. He says Behemoth has legs like cedar trees and the incredible tail. Now, He's not talking about a chihuahua. He's talking about some of the dinosaurs. We have archaeology that shows us that dinosaurs have become extinct. And I believe God made them. I believe they're in the book of Job. Behemoth, they were called. We have different names for them. I believe when He talks about the reptile, the sea creature that was in the Nile River, I don't believe He's talking about a crocodile. There are too many discrepancies on that. I believe He's talking about sea creatures that have probably become extinct at this point. I believe God created all of that. And we try to piece that together. We can look back and we can say, yeah, absolutely. God put that together. And I believe that's what explains our ice age. So, Pastor Mark, do you believe in global warming? Yes. Was there ever an ice age? Yes. Is it warmer now than then? Yes. So I believe in global warming. I believe the ice age occurred when God judged the world, knocked our earth off of its axis, and created this incredible thing that happens with freezing of the poles because of their distance and proximity, and there's no longer a canopy to distribute that radiation from the sun in an equal manner so that the entire world is tropical. I believe all that took place. Last thing He did, we got to hurry to be just about done. Last thing He did, the first 4 verses of chapter 2 should be in chapter 1, but I didn't do it, so they're in chapter 2. The last day then, so the creation of the heavens and the earth and everything in them was completed. On the seventh day, God had finished His work of creation, so He rested from all His work. And God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy because it was the day when He rested from all the work of creation. This is the account of creation of the heavens and the earth. On the last day, God rested. He didn't rest because He was tired. He rested because He wanted to pause and be able to Sabbath about what had been done, about what He had created and what He had done. Somebody was leaving for the first service and he said, isn't it incredible that Hebrews says, enter into my rest or into my Sabbath? The first day man woke up was God's Sabbath, was the rest of God. The rest that God had prepared. He had done all the work and then made man. And when Adam gets up the next day, it is the Sabbath day of God to reflect on what He has done. 4 things that I want us to go home with today. Just making some comments regarding Genesis 1. So we've talked about Genesis 1 and our God and how big He is and what He's done. Number 1, He is a God of order. He is a God of order. God is the one who is seen as bringing order out of disorder, shape out of shapelessness, form out of formlessness, and He is most definitely a God of order. We see that in His instructions on the temple and temple worship. We see that in the way that He instructed the children of Israel and how He told them to go about forming the moral laws that would regulate society. We see His order in everything that we do, and God is a God of order. And can I tell you this? If your life is out of control, if your life is spinning in a tailspin, that is not God's plan for your life. He is not a God of disorder. He is a God of order. If your life is out of order or out of control, it is God's will that we learn Him in order to prevent that from happening. What would have happened if God used your lifestyle to create everything? He'd be in trouble if He used mine. God's perfect will for my life is not that my life is chaotic. It's that there's order to my life that is brought about not because He eliminates all the problems. Oh, the godliest people are the ones that God doesn't allow stuff to happen in their lives. No, we all know that's not true. Godliest people are the ones who respond to what God is doing, understanding that He is a loving God of order, and that He has designed a way for us to live, and it doesn't have to be chaos. We live without margin, and we pay the price for it. Number 2, He is a God of separation. He divided light from darkness. He divided ground from water. He divided, and He continues to divide. He told Israel, you are in the land, but you're not a part of the land. I'm to be what you are about. And I want you to be separate from the people around you. Don't pick up their idol worship. Don't pick up their bad habits and the way they're going to choose to explain their existence. We're in the world. Jesus came and lived so that He could show us and demonstrate what it means to be in the world, but not be of the world. God creates separation. He's a God of separation, and it would be naive for me to think that there aren't some in the room today that are trending toward darkness. Men love darkness more than light, and we are going to trend and drift toward darkness unless we are conscientiously aware that we are to separate ourselves unto God and remove from our lives that which would distract us from glorifying Him and our purpose for existence. Probably somebody in the room that needs to let go of something you're hanging on to because it's taking you away from God. It's not improving your walk with Him. It's not helping you. In fact, it can be communicating exactly the opposite. Number 3, everything that God does is good. God paused when He got done with each day and He said, wow. That right there, that's good. And when He got done making man, listen, that extends to your life and to mine today. When God made you, He said, that right there, that's very good. God has a design and a plan for our lives. He's got a will that we can either resist or we can take up our cross and we can submit our lives and crawl up on the altar and give ourselves to Him and submit to His design and His will for our lives and see incredible things that God can do through that. And lastly, He is mighty. He is mighty. He's mighty to heal. He's mighty to repair relationships. He's mighty to give strength. He is mighty to save. Maybe you don't know Him as your Savior. Can I tell you? He is mighty to save. He is so mighty that He can provide a way to redeem us, to buy us back after we've sinned and failed and ignored Him. Psalm 33, 6 through 9 says this, "The Lord merely spoke, and the heavens were created. He breathed the word, and all the stars were born. He assigned the sea to its boundaries and locked the oceans in vast reservoirs. Let the whole world fear the Lord, and let everyone stand in awe of Him. For when God spoke, the world began. It appeared at His command." That's the God that wants to walk through the day with me today and tomorrow and for the rest of my life. I'm going to invite the band to come back up, and as they do, I just want to ask a couple of questions, just personal reflection. They're going to come, we're going to sing before we go, but personal reflection. How about this? Is your life out of order? When I look at the God who has designed these things to work, and I look at my life, I see a bunch of stuff that's not working. Can I tell you that that's not God's plan for you to continue doing that? That it is God's plan for you to do that which changes. You know, the definition of insanity is this: to continue to do the exact same thing and expect a different result. You want a different result, you've got to do a different thing. And there is a God of order that wants that in your life. Is there a distraction between you and God? Between the secular and the sacred in your life? Between the temporal and the eternal? Where's your focus? Colossians says, don't look on the things that are seen, but look on the things that are unseen. The things that are seen are temporal. The things that are unseen are eternal. Where is your focus? Is it on heaven? Is it on what God has planned? Is it on eternity? Is it about a purpose for existence that God breathed into you when you were born? Are you fulfilling that? Or are you trying to acknowledge that there is a God while doing your own will? Can you or will you choose to believe that God does everything for good? He does everything for our good. On your worst day that you would say, that's just a bad day. That's the worst day of my life. Can I tell you this? That there is a loving Heavenly Father that has never done anything to any human being that wasn't done in love. We may not understand it, and it may not be what we expected, and it may not be the way we would have designed it if we could tell Him how to do it. But if He is who He is, we don't get the right to tell Him how to do it. We get the right to glorify Him however He chooses.